The man without eyes. I had lived in this semi-rural area for years. The bumpy roads, the broken streetlights, and the inky black night sky, all were familiar to me. I often drove home late, enjoying the peace of the night, but one night changed the way I saw my neighborhood forever. That day, I had a meeting that had lasted longer than expected. When I left the company, it was almost midnight. I was exhausted. The drive home was long and empty, with endless fields on both sides, only a few houses scattered here and there. I had driven this road hundreds of times, enough to know every pothole, every curve. But that night, something was wrong. I didn't expect to see anyone on the road, but then I saw him. On the side of the road, under the weak light of a flickering streetlight, stood a man. He was facing the road, as if waiting for a car. I didn't know why, but the moment I saw him, I felt a chill run down my spine. An unsettling feeling seeped into my bones like a cold wind. I slowed down. The headlights illuminated him, old jeans, dark jacket, short hair, maybe black. But when I tried to look at his face, I couldn't see eyes. It wasn't the low light, or the fact that he was bowing his head or wearing sunglasses. It was just, blank. Where his eyes should have been, there were just two dark patches, as if a vital part of his face was missing. I swallowed. My throat felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. My hands trembled on the wheel. I tried to convince myself that I was just tired, that the headlights might be creating a strange illusion. But then he raised his hand, a small, polite gesture, like he was asking for a ride. My whole body went cold. Part of me wanted to stop, wanted to believe that he was just a normal guy, someone who needed help. But my instinct screamed, "Don't stop." I stepped on the gas. The car sped past him, and for a split second, I glanced out the passenger window. He was still, arm raised, not moving. Not waving harder, not running after the car. Just, standing there. And even as my headlights flashed by, I couldn't see his eyes. When I was about 10 meters away, I looked in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, like a statue. Not moving. Not shifting. I felt my breathing quicken. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my chest. I didn't dare turn around. I just drove faster. Finally, I got home. I parked right under the light outside. My hands were shaking so much that it took me a few seconds to put the car into park. I sat in the car, took a deep breath, and tried to calm myself. But the feeling of unease didn't go away. I walked into the house and locked the door immediately. It was dark inside. I slowly walked into the bathroom and splashed water on my face. Looking in the mirror, I saw a tired face, so tense that my eyes were sunken. I closed my eyes, trying to erase the image of that man. But I couldn't forget. For some reason, I found myself walking out to the living room, pulling the curtains open and looking out onto the street. Everything was quiet. No one was standing there. I told myself, it must be a trick of the light. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, two dark, empty holes, looking at me through the windshield. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if I had stopped that night? I've never been one to believe in the supernatural. I'm practical, rational, never letting my imagination fool me. But there are moments in life that make you think again. And that night was one of them. I remember it clearly. I left the office later than usual, stepped outside to get some fresh air. The streets were quiet, the streetlights casting a weak, yellow glow. I decided to drive home, like every day, on the familiar road. On the way, I saw a figure standing by the side of the road, right under a broken streetlight. He stood silently, waving his hand as if asking for a ride. I hesitated. It was late at night, and I wasn't used to picking up strangers. But there was something about him that I couldn't take my eyes off. His face was in shadow, but I could make out his features, his high nose, his sharp jaw, his messy black hair. There was only one thing, the only thing that made my whole body cold, were the eyes. Not normal eyes. No whites, no pupils. Just a complete void of darkness. Not the darkness of night, not like when someone stands in a dim light. It was an endless pit, an absolute void. A terrifying absence. My heart pounded, a feeling of panic rising in my chest. I immediately stepped on the gas, rushing forward, leaving the man behind. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, he was gone. No one. No sign that anyone had ever been there. In the weeks that followed, I could not forget that image. Every time I drove home late at night, I would tense up when I passed that stretch of road. Sometimes I would speed up, just wanting to get past. Sometimes I would slow down, scanning, but there was nothing but darkness. Finally, the broken streetlight was replaced. That should have made me feel safer. But it didn't. Every time I got close to the area, I felt a chill run down my spine. An invisible fear. Then I started having dreams. In the dream, I was standing in front of the guardrail where I had seen him. It was pitch black, just me and a figure a few feet away. He didn't say anything, didn't move. But I knew he was looking at me, even though I couldn't see his eyes. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. Cold sweat broke out all over my body. I tried to convince myself that it was just a dream. That maybe I was just too stressed, too exhausted. But the feeling never left me. It all came to a head one night when I decided to go for a run to clear my mind. I don't usually listen to music when I run at night, preferring the quiet of the streets. But that day, for some reason, I felt like something was wrong. I ran past a closed convenience store, its red neon lights still glowing. There was no one around. The air was cool, a little damp. I tried to focus on my steps, on my steady breathing. Then I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was an echo of myself. But no. It came from behind. I turned around. No one was there. But I felt a gaze without eyes. My throat was dry. I didn't dare stand still for too long. I dashed forward, picking up speed, trying to get away from that place. But no matter how fast I ran, I still had the feeling that someone was watching me. When I got home, I slammed the door shut, locking everything. I stood in the darkness of the room, my heart still pounding. I looked out the window, the street outside was still empty, nothing unusual. But I knew. I knew that I had seen something that did not belong to this world. And I knew that, it was still out there. Maybe one day, I would see him again. Whispers in the night. It was late. The city was slowly falling into silence, only the flickering streetlights casting shadows on the sidewalk. I was jogging like every day, following the familiar path. The quiet space was filled with the music in my headphones and my steady breathing. But tonight, something was wrong. A soft whisper cut into the melody I was listening to. At first, I thought it was just a strange background music or static. But then, it became clearer, repeating hauntingly. My name. My name. I was startled, stopped, and took off my headphones. The street was still quiet. I glanced around, no one was there. It must be a sound problem. I swallowed, tried to calm myself, and continued running. This time, I turned the music back on, a little louder to drown out the feeling of anxiety. But less than a minute later, the whispering voice returned. It wasn't just a voice talking, it was calling my name, drawing out each syllable, as if someone were right next to me, speaking softly. I felt my heart beat faster. My throat was dry. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone to check. There were no strange notifications, no calls or messages. Everything on the screen looked completely normal. But the voice was still there. Without another thought, I rushed forward. My footsteps echoed on the pavement, my panting and the music interrupted by the terrifying sounds. I just wanted to get home, where there was light, where there was a locked door, where I could hide from this thing. After what seemed like an eternity, I was standing in front of my apartment door. I opened it quickly, slammed it shut, and locked it. Standing in the dark, I gasped, sweat pouring down my body. I took off my headphones and set them on the kitchen counter. They looked harmless, just 2 small pieces of plastic. But I didn't dare turn on the music anymore. I took out my phone, turned it off completely, and went into the bathroom. The cold water on my face helped me wake up, but the reflection in the mirror did not reassure me. My eyes were wide and sunken, as if I had just experienced a nightmare. After regaining my composure, I went back to the living room and turned on my phone. Everything was normal. No errors, no messages. I tried the music, it played normally, no whispers. A feeling of relief washed over me. Maybe I was just too nervous, or there was some technical problem. I chuckled, mocking myself. But then, just as I was about to take the headphones off, a deep, clear voice rang out right next to my ear, no longer a whisper. "You think you're safe?" The phone screen went black. The room suddenly fell completely silent. I froze in place, every hair on the back of my neck standing up. And then, right behind me, there was a soft sigh. The shadow behind the door. The old apartment quietly nestled in a deserted neighborhood. The yellow light flickered, illuminating the silhouette of a young man standing by the window. He, Hong, frowned slightly as he looked at the phone screen. There were no new messages, no missed calls. Outside, a gentle wind stirred the thin curtains, carrying the slight chill of the late night. I'm stuck in the house, but everything is still normal, right? Hong sighed, put the phone down on the table and scanned the shabby apartment. The faded walls, the old dusty bookshelves, everything looked gloomy and heavy. He knew he couldn't live here much longer. On the day of moving, Hong felt relieved. The new apartment was clean, bright, with white walls and large windows welcoming the sunlight. He walked in, dragging his heavy suitcase behind him, holding a steaming cup of hot coffee. New space, new life. He told himself that. But from the very first moment, something was wrong. This apartment was too quiet. Not the kind of comfortable quiet but a strange silence, as if this place was waiting for something. Hong shook his head to get rid of that unreasonable feeling and started to arrange his things. However, when he put his favorite book on the shelf, he felt like it had just been moved. No. It must be because he was too tired. A few days later, Hong began to notice strange things. Small objects seemed to change positions even though he clearly remembered where he had put them. The book on the desk the morning before appeared on the bookshelf again. The window sometimes opened even though he remembered closing it. Hong tried to explain it logically. Maybe it was the wind, maybe he forgot, but the uncomfortable feeling still lingered. One night, while sitting in front of the computer screen, he heard a faint sound. Like a whisper. He raised his head and looked around. No one was there. But a chill ran down his spine. That night, Hong couldn't sleep. Then he heard footsteps. At first, very faint. Then, they became slower but clearer, as if someone was walking in the living room. Hong listened tensely. Click. The sound of a light switch turning on. A faint light shone through the crack of the bedroom door. Impossible. Hong sat up, his heart pounding. He reached out to turn on the night light, and got out of bed. The bedroom door opened, revealing an empty hallway. No one was there. But, why did he feel like someone was watching him? A light breeze blew by, making him shiver. The next morning, Hong decided to find out about this apartment. He skimmed through old posts, looking for information about the building. Finally, he called the landlord. The man on the other end of the line was silent for a long time before answering. You noticed it too? Hong clenched the phone. Previous tenants, they also reported strange phenomena. Some even said they saw someone in the mirror at night. Hong felt his chest tighten. That night, he sat on the bed, his eyes glued to the bedroom door. Someone was standing behind the door. He felt it clearly. A faint shadow through the gap at the bottom of the door. His heart was pounding madly. He took a deep breath, reached out and grabbed the door handle. Cold. Without thinking further, he yanked the door open. There was no one. But, the air around him seemed to thicken, and a musty smell suddenly rose up. A soft sigh sounded behind him. Hong turned around. There was nothing. But the mirror in the room reflected a dark figure looking at him. Hong turned on all the lights in the house, hugged the blanket tightly, and tried to fall asleep. But sleep did not come. In the bright room, he felt an invisible gaze still following him. The camera slowly moved back, capturing the image of the apartment through the glass window. And in the large mirror in the corner of the room, there was a faint black shadow, standing silently, watching Hong. I thought I was just imagining it, but was it real? The background music faded, the whispers disappeared. The screen went black. The man who disappears. The smell of salt, dust, and a hint of gasoline all mixed together, choking me. I lay on the cold ground, my head spinning, trying to calm down. A sharp pain flared in my knee as I tried to move. Maybe I had been in an accident. The sound of gravel rustling behind me startled me. A man stood there, silently observing me. He wore an old, faded hat, his coat frayed at the elbows. His arms hung at his sides, eerily silent. I swallowed, trying to stand, but my knees couldn't support my weight. A strong hand caught my arm. His fingers were firm and steady. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice hoarse. He didn't reply, just nodded slightly and gestured for me to lean against him. I hesitated, but there was no other way. Every step made me wince in pain. We moved slowly toward the curb. When we got there, he turned and lifted my bike onto his shoulder with ease. He didn't ask any questions, just waved for me to follow. I wondered if he could speak, but I was too tired to care. The pain was getting worse, my breathing became more labored. I focused on each step, trying not to collapse. The night air was cool, the smell of weeds in the wind. We walked in silence. I looked around, trying to find the lights of the nearest gas station. In the distance, a flickering light appeared at the corner where the highway curved. I felt relieved. "Can you help me get there?" I asked, my voice weak. The man just nodded, saying nothing. I felt a little uneasy, but in this situation, I had no other choice. Another 10 minutes passed in silence. At this point, I noticed that my helmet was askew. I took it off and shook it, and dust flew off in small clumps. The man glanced at me but didn't respond. I began to wonder, was he deaf or mute? Or did he just not want to talk? I decided not to ask any further. The pain in my knee made it impossible for me to think about this mysterious man. After about 15 minutes, we approached the gas station. The neon lights flickered faintly, creating a halo of blue light on the road. The man raised his hand and pointed at it. I nodded, trying to form a more complete sentence. "Thank you, I really appreciate it." He just bowed his head, a simple gesture but something very strange. I walked towards the gas station, intending to turn back and ask if he could help me make a phone call. But when I turned around, he was gone. I stopped, my heart pounding. I looked around, but all I could see was darkness and the weeds along the side of the road. There were no footsteps, no sign of anyone leaving. The wind blew, making me shiver. I tried to listen, but there was nothing but the sound of gravel under my feet as I unconsciously took a step back. Where did he go? I muttered. I tried calling out, but my voice was only a faint echo, carried away by the wind. A feeling of unease spread through my chest. Why had he disappeared so quickly? He was probably only a few meters away, but there was no movement in the darkness. I shook my head, trying to clear my wild thoughts, and limped the rest of the way. The gas station door clanged as I pushed it open. The fluorescent light stung my eyes. The interior was deserted, with only one clerk sitting behind the counter. He was a thin guy, maybe in his 30s, wearing a wrinkled gray polo shirt with the gas station logo. He looked up at me, his eyes unfocused. "Can I help you? I've been in an accident, do you have a first aid kit?" He nodded, walked around behind the counter, and took a small box from a cabinet. "Did you flip over?" he asked as he handed me bandages and antiseptic wipes. "Yeah, on the back road." He only nodded as if he was only half listening. I sat down on a plastic chair by the window, relieved to be able to rest my feet. After a while, I looked up and said, "There was a man who helped me, he came here with me. Did you see anyone?" The gas station attendant frowned. "Which man?" I blinked. He was wearing an old hat, didn't talk, just gestured. He was carrying my bike. "Did you see him come by?" The gas station attendant looked at me for a moment and then shrugged. "I've been here all night. No one else has come by." A chill ran down my spine. "No way," I muttered, turning to the window and looking out at the dark street outside. There was no one. Not a shadow, not a movement. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt the man, I felt his hand when he helped me up. And yet, he had never existed. Or had he never really been alive? The dog in the night. I have a routine. Every evening, after a long day at work, I walk around the lake near my house. I love the quiet of the night, with only the sound of crickets, the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the occasional jogger passing by. But that day, something was different. At first, I didn't notice. I kept walking at a steady pace, feeling my breath mingling with the cool air. But when I happened to turn my head and look over my shoulder, I saw it. A dog. It was standing behind me, a few meters away on the gravel path. I hadn't noticed it since when, but it was there, motionless. A stray. A stray. I wasn't sure. But there was something strange, it didn't move like the other dogs. There was no panting, no eager wagging of the tail, no eyes begging for attention. I kept walking. Neither did it. I slowed down. It slowed down. I sped up. It kept the same pace. It never got any closer, but it didn't let me get far behind it. When I stopped by a bench to stretch my legs, the dog stopped too. I turned to face it. The streetlights caught its eyes, strangely bright. Not the usual reflective light that animals have, it was sharper, more intense. I tried to ignore the unease creeping into my chest. I spoke, my voice trying to stay calm. "Hello, kid. Are you lost?" No response. No barking, no wagging tail, no tilting of the head curiously like other dogs. It just stood there, looking at me. I tried to step closer. It backed away, lowering its head, but its eyes didn't leave me. Not in the usual fearful or wary way, it was like it was, observing me, analyzing me. A shiver ran down my spine. I decided to ignore it and continued walking. It followed me, keeping the same distance as before, as if it were tied to me by an invisible string. Halfway around the lake, I passed a maintenance worker pushing a small cart, probably checking the trash. I asked cheerfully, "Do you know whose dog that is?" He glanced over my shoulder, squinted, and shook his head. "Never seen it before." Then he returned to his work without seeming to mind. I continued walking. The dog followed. Those eyes. I didn't like them. I tried to focus on the other sounds around me to calm myself. The chirping of crickets, the distant sound of traffic, my own footsteps on gravel. But there was one thing I barely heard, its footsteps. It walked very lightly, almost silently. At the end of the second walk, I decided to check to see if he had a collar. I slowed down, stopped. He did the same. I crouched down, patting my leg like a dog would. "Come here. I won't hurt you." He backed away. I took a step forward. He turned and bolted. In a split second, he was gone into the darkness near the water's edge. I couldn't react. I squinted, looking for any movement. The bushes rustled slightly, but other than that, nothing. I walked toward it, calling. "Hey! Come here. I just want to help." There was no response. I circled the nearest trees, but didn't dare stray too far from the path. It was too dark, one wrong step and I could slip and fall. I expected to see it lurking somewhere, or at least hear the rustling of dry leaves. But nothing. No footprints. No breathing. Nothing. A chill ran down my spine. My hands were a little damp, whether from sweat or the cold. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I told myself that the dog must have found a gap in the fence around the lake and crawled out. It must have. But I couldn't quite convince myself. The way it disappeared wasn't normal. I continued walking around, mostly to prove that I wasn't afraid. But each step was heavier than usual. I kept glancing around, looking for any movement. Every time I passed a lamppost, I saw my own shadow stretching across the path. And I felt a strong urge to check behind me. Sometimes I did. But nothing. Finally, I got home earlier than usual. In my apartment, I turned on more lights than usual. My heart was still racing, my breathing was still erratic. I tried to watch a TV show to distract myself. But every few minutes, my mind would return to that moment, the eyes glowing in the night, the way it followed me silently without making a sound. I told myself I was being silly. But when I slept, my dreams took me back to that lake. This time, I still heard footsteps behind me. But I never found anyone following me. Eyes in the dark. I still remember the first time I saw it. It was a dog, or at least I thought it was a dog. It stood far away, near the edge of the lake, its yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. As the dim streetlights came closer, I realized its fur was jet black, almost absorbing all the light around it. It stared at me, not barking, not moving. My heart pounded. But then I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't see it again for days, but the unsettling feeling still followed me. Every time I walked by the lake at night, I felt like something was watching me. I always turned to look, but there was never anything there, or maybe I just didn't look long enough to see it. My life changed when I took a new job. The office was on the 8th floor of a half-abandoned commercial building. The lower floors were mostly empty, with only a few small offices scattered about. I sensed something was off the first day. The lobby was darker than usual, the fluorescent lights dim and emitting an unpleasant buzzing sound. The hallways were long and narrow, with old carpets and scuffed walls that no one had bothered to repaint. As I walked through, the space seemed to swallow all sound, even my footsteps sounded strangely soft. My office was at the end of the hallway, across from a large window that looked out onto the old warehouse. The room was empty except for a desk, a computer, and a few chairs. During the day, the place was eerily quiet. I rarely saw any coworkers, and sometimes only a few people showed up in the elevator. No one spoke to anyone, as if they too felt something was wrong. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. But then, I began to realize that this silence wasn't normal. That evening, I decided to stay late to finish the report. At 8 o'clock, the floor was completely quiet. The lights in the hallway automatically turned off when no one passed by, but there was one thing that worried me: the lights in the area opposite my office kept flickering. At first, I thought it was just a technical problem, but the flickering rhythm was very regular, as if someone was deliberately turning the switch on and off. I tried to ignore it and continued working. But when I glanced at the computer screen, from the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow flash by. I was startled and turned around. No one was there. The break room door was still closed. The hallway was quiet. I swallowed, stood up and walked out. As soon as I entered the hallway, the lights stopped flickering. Everything returned to normal, as if what had just happened had never happened. I looked around, trying to find an explanation, but there was nothing. With a slight shiver, I returned to my desk. I decided to put on my headphones to concentrate. But as soon as I turned on the music, the volume suddenly turned up to maximum. The sound was so piercing that I jumped, immediately taking off the headphones. My heart pounded as I looked down at the screen. The volume icon was still at normal. I tried turning the volume all the way down, then turned it back on. Everything seemed fine. I sighed, thinking it was probably just a system error. I put my headphones back on. But the moment I turned on the music, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I froze. Slowly, I looked at the computer screen, where the image behind me was reflected. And I saw it. A dark figure was standing right behind me. It had no clear shape, just a vague mass of darkness. But the eyes, bright yellow eyes, exactly like the dog I saw by the lake. I turned around. There was no one there. The office door slowly closed, without anyone touching it. I held my breath. Something was wrong. I couldn't stay here any longer. I quickly packed up my things, turned off my computer, and left the office. As I pressed the elevator call button, I felt a cold gaze behind me. I didn't dare to turn around. After that night, I never worked late again. I also avoided the area near the lake at night. But there was one thing that bothered me. That dog, did it really exist? Or was it just a sign of something else? Something was still watching me, from the shadows. What do you think about this story? Do you believe that there are things that are always watching us without us knowing? Try looking behind you. Are you sure you're really alone? Night shift in the office, don't stay after dusk. I've never believed in ghosts. Stories of darkness, strange sounds, or fleeting shadows, they were all just products of the imagination. But what I'm about to tell you can't be a simple hallucination. I worked in an office downtown. Work was stressful, projects piled up, and I often had to stay late. Gradually, I noticed something strange. After 7 p.m., the building started to change. The air became heavier, colder than usual. The hallway lights sometimes flickered, emitting an annoying buzzing sound. And the scariest thing, I almost never saw anyone else. At first, I thought it was just me working too hard. But one night, when I stayed until almost 10 p.m., I knew something was wrong. I stretched, trying to relax after hours of staring at the screen. Outside the window, the city was still bustling, but inside the building, there was absolute silence. I stood up and walked out into the hallway. Everything was normal, until I noticed the door to the break room was wide open. I was sure it had been closed. I walked in, flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. The light bulb must have blown. I turned away, and then, there was a rustling sound behind me. Like a plastic bag being dragged across the floor. I froze. There was no one in the room. There were no bags on the floor. But I definitely heard it. My throat went dry. A cold shiver ran down the back of my neck. It felt like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But the break room door was now open a little wider. I backed away. This was no longer a fantasy, I decided to leave immediately. I packed my things as quickly as possible, grabbed my coat, and headed for the elevator. The electronic board showed that the elevator was on the first floor. I pressed the call button. While waiting, I noticed the hallway lights flickering. First the light near the break room. Then the light near the far corner office. Each area of the hallway turned off and on again. It was as if someone was walking down the hallway, turning off the switches one by one. I tightened my grip on my bag, backing up toward the elevator. The metal doors finally opened. I almost rushed inside, pressing the button to go down to the lobby. Just before the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was tall, thin, and its empty eyes reflected the flickering lights. The elevator doors slammed shut. I gasped, telling myself I was imagining things. But then, the elevator lights flickered. A ding. The elevator stopped. Floor 3. But I didn't press the button for floor 3. The doors slowly opened, revealing a dark hallway. No one was there. There was an eerie silence. The door didn't close right away. It just kept opening, as if waiting for someone to enter. 2-3 seconds passed. Just as I was about to press the close button, a sound came from the hallway. Footsteps. Slow. Drag. I didn't wait any longer. I frantically pressed the close button, my heart pounding. The door closed before I could see it. A thin, dark hand, with fingers that were too long, reached out from the darkness. When the elevator opened in the lobby, I rushed out, straight to the parking lot. The building was eerily silent. No one. Not a sound. I jumped into my car, slammed the door, and locked it. I didn't dare look back as I left the parking lot. From then on, I never stayed after 6 p.m. I rearranged my work schedule so I wouldn't be alone in the building at night. But sometimes, as the clock ticked toward 7, I'd notice the hallway lights flickering. As if something was still watching me. The mysterious necklace. I had never believed in the supernatural, until I brought home my grandfather's necklace. That evening, I drove back from cleaning out my grandfather's old house. He had passed away not long ago, and I was tasked with clearing out his mementos. I didn't remember much about my grandfather. He was a quiet, reserved man who lived alone. I only knew that he had many secrets, things his family never talked about. As I placed the cardboard box containing his belongings on the kitchen table, I began to lay them out: a broken watch, a few old yellowing letters, a few postcards from vacations he had taken decades ago. But one item caught my eye immediately: a necklace. It was a smooth, oval metal pendant, without any markings or markings. When I picked it up, I noticed that it felt strange. It vibrated slightly in my palm. No pain, no heat, just a very strange feeling. I'm not the type to panic, but this made me curious. I put it down on the kitchen counter and didn't think much of it. I heated up some food in the microwave, but as I stood in the kitchen, I began to hear a small sound, a faint buzzing, like a mosquito stuck in my ear. At first I thought it was just tiredness, but then I realized that the sound only came when I looked at the necklace. That night, I went to bed at 11 p.m., but I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with meaningless thoughts. When I finally did fall asleep, I had a nightmare. I found myself standing in my grandfather's old room. In my dream, I was rummaging through an empty closet, searching for something I didn't know what. Suddenly, the wall shook violently. The door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. I heard a scratching sound, like someone dragging a metal object across the wooden floor. I woke up, drenched in sweat. When I turned on the nightlight, I noticed scratches on my forearms, thin red lines, not deep but clearly not from my accidental scratching. I looked around the room, but there was nothing that could have caused the scratches. I felt uneasy. But I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. The next morning, when I went into the kitchen, I noticed that the smell of metal in the air was stronger than before. I approached the necklace, and immediately felt nauseous. I quickly picked it up and put it in a small wooden box, then put the box in a drawer in the living room. But the strange thing was, even though I didn't touch it anymore, I still felt restless. It was like there was a persistent itch at the back of my head that I couldn't scratch. That night, I had another nightmare. This time, I found myself standing in the living room, the lights were off. In the middle of the floor, the necklace emitted a faint light. I bent down to pick it up, but my hands didn't obey me. I felt like someone was controlling my arms, forcing me to pick up the pendant. When my fingers touched it, everything went dark. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. I turned on the night light, pulled up my sleeves to check. This time, scratches appeared on both of my arms. They burned when I touched them. I started to panic for real. The next morning, I met Marcus, a close friend of mine. When I told him what had happened, he was silent for a moment, then said, "Look, it's probably just stress. Your uncle just passed away, you have a lot on your mind. But if it makes you feel bad, don't touch it anymore." I followed Marcus' advice. I put the box on the top shelf of my closet and tried to forget about it. But the strange events didn't stop. Even without touching the necklace, I still heard strange noises at night. Around midnight, I would wake up startled by the sound of very light footsteps on the wooden floor. I jumped out of bed, ran into the hallway, and turned on the light. No one was there. But the air felt heavy, as if I were standing in a stuffy room with no windows. I started to feel something moving out of the corner of my eye. But every time I turned to look, there was nothing. The nightmares got worse. I woke up with more and more scratches, some on my shoulders, some on my back. I tried sleeping with a long-sleeved shirt, but it didn't help. The scratches kept coming, and the angles didn't make sense if I'd injured myself in my sleep. One night, when my fear was at its peak, I decided to do something bold. I took the box from the closet, opened it, and for the first time since I'd put it away, I stared at the necklace. It wasn't still. It was spinning slowly in the box, as if an invisible wind was pushing it. At that moment, I felt an image flash through my mind, a strange man, wearing a necklace on his. The strange house. I'm not a superstitious person. I've never believed in ghosts or the paranormal. But this story might make you think again. I had just moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood. It met all my criteria: close to work, reasonably priced, and quite comfortable. When I walked in, everything looked normal, the walls were intact, the floors were clean, and there were no signs of anything disturbing. But as soon as I stepped through the door, a strange feeling crept over me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, just a vague unease. Maybe it was because I'd had a long day. I shrugged, telling myself it was just my mood. The first few days went by smoothly. But then little things started to happen. At first, I thought I was just forgetful. I distinctly remember leaving a book on the living room table, but the next morning I'd find it on the floor or on another shelf. One time, I was sure I'd opened the window to let in some fresh air, but when I got home from work I'd find it closed. Maybe I'd closed it before I left without remembering. But then one night, about 2 weeks after I moved in, things got worse. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard a small click. A familiar sound, the sound of a light switch. I frowned, sat up, and looked toward the bedroom door. Light was glimmering under the crack. I distinctly remembered turning the light off before I went to bed. I always did. My heart started to beat faster as I slowly walked to the door. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and stepped out into the hallway. The light was bright. I glanced around. Nothing unusual except that the light was on. I swallowed, thinking that maybe the switch was faulty. I turned off the light and went back to bed, but the uneasiness wouldn't let up. I stayed up for another hour, staring at the darkness under the door, waiting to see if the light would come on again. But that night, everything was quiet. A few days later, I had another rough night. This time, I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was standing in the guest room. I couldn't hear anything clearly, just very faint sounds, like someone was moving very slowly across the wooden floor. Maybe it was just the heating or random noises of the house. But the unease still clung to me. The next morning, I decided to check. When I walked into the living room, everything looked normal. But then I noticed that a cardboard box I'd left in the corner had been moved. The papers inside were scattered on the floor. I knew for sure I hadn't touched it in a week. I picked everything up, cleaned it up, and tried to reassure myself. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I decided to call the landlord and ask if anyone else had experienced similar things here. He hesitated for a few seconds before laughing awkwardly. "Oh, some of the previous tenants have reported strange things, lights turning on by themselves, things moving, noises at night. But nothing, the house is probably just settling in." His explanation was unconvincing. I hung up, feeling more restless than before. If other people had experienced these things, then it clearly wasn't my imagination. I tried to ignore the strange feelings and focused on my work. I worked until late, had dinner, and went straight to bed, trying to forget everything. But then one night, an inexplicable feeling came. I was drifting off to sleep, lying on my side, when I suddenly felt someone standing outside my bedroom door. It wasn't normal fear. It was a primal feeling, the feeling when you know something is there, even if you can't see it. I held my breath, listening. There was a very faint sound, like breathing or the rustle of fabric. My heart was pounding in my chest. I felt like someone was standing very close, leaning against the door. I didn't dare move. I debated with myself, should I ask, "Who's there?" out loud? But part of me didn't want to know the answer. Finally, I told myself I couldn't lie there forever. I sat up, slowly walking to the door. The doorknob was damp. I shivered. Without hesitation, I turned the lock and jerked the door open in one swift motion. The hallway was dark. The dim streetlights shone through the small windows, but other than that, there was nothing. Not a soul. My heartbeat was still erratic as I checked each room. Everything was the same. I went back to bed, trying to sleep, but I couldn't relax until 2 a.m. That weekend, I decided to spend more time in the house during the day. I cleaned up the living room, arranged my books, tried to make it feel more familiar. Maybe if I made this place mine, I would feel safer. But as I sat down at my desk, I realized something. I had spent the whole day changing this place, but there was one thing that hadn't changed. That feeling. The feeling that I hadn't been here for a while. The house is not empty. I never thought I would have to run away from a house. I used to believe that stories about haunted houses and wandering souls were just imagination, things that weren't real. But now, I couldn't deny what I had experienced. I rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. There was nothing special about the place, it was old but clean, the rent was reasonable. When I moved in, I noticed that the space was a bit cramped but nothing unusual. A few colleagues stopped by to help me arrange my things, and we watched a movie and chatted happily. I felt more comfortable with people around. But as soon as they left, the atmosphere in the house became strange. A heavy feeling settled over me, as if something was lurking in the dark, silently observing me. I tried to ignore the feeling and went to bed, telling myself that maybe I was just tired. I woke up at 3 a.m. The room was dark, but I heard a small sound from the hallway, a faint sound, like soft footsteps. I held my breath, lying still and listening. The sound came again, closer this time. A chill ran down my spine. I considered calling the police, but then realized I had no proof. Just a noise in the night, could it be the old house creaking, right? But I couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling. I slowly opened the bedroom door and looked into the hallway. The hallway light was off. I distinctly remembered leaving it on before going to bed. I turned on the light. There was nothing but an empty hallway. But when I turned around, I noticed something strange. The living room door was slightly open. I always closed that door before going to bed. I slowly walked over and pushed it open. The cold air rushed in, making me shiver. The table lamp in the living room was still on, even though I was sure I had turned it off. I pulled the cord to turn it off, but the moment the light went out, I felt a cold shiver run down the back of my neck. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just quickly left the living room, closed the door, and went back to my bedroom. I locked the door and lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, listening for strange sounds in the hallway. The nights that followed only got worse. Lights would turn on in empty rooms, windows would open or close for no reason. Papers I left on the table would be shuffled, drawers would open in the morning. And there were nights when I heard soft breathing just outside my bedroom door. I started sleeping with a small baseball bat next to my bed. But I never found anyone to use it. The landlord refused to answer my questions about the history of the apartment. Whenever I mentioned the strange things in the house, he just shrugged and avoided it. I felt exhausted. Every day was a torture, not knowing when the next strange thing would happen. I couldn't keep living like this. I decided to leave, even if it meant breaking my lease. I started packing my things, preparing to move into a coworker's house. But the night before I left, something happened that I would never forget. It was around midnight. I was packing the last of my belongings when suddenly, the light in the living room turned on. I froze. A chill ran down my spine as I heard a soft laugh, a small, but distinct sound, right behind me. I turned around. No one was there. But the living room door was wide open. I held my breath, staring into the darkness inside. The room was empty, but it felt like something was there, standing in the darkest corner, silently watching me. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the house, not looking back. The next morning, I returned to pack up the rest of my things. The landlord finally agreed to meet me in person. When I told him I wanted to leave immediately, he just sighed and nodded. I understand, he said. Not everyone can stand it for long. Those words made my blood run cold. Am I not the first to leave? I asked. He was silent for a moment, then said only one sentence before turning away. This house is never empty. I didn't ask any more questions. I left that very day. I didn't know what haunted that house. I didn't care. All I knew was that I was lucky to get out. And if anyone rents that apartment after me, I hope they are strong enough to face whatever is inside. Because it is not alone. The mystery of the black dog by the lake. I am not a person who believes in the supernatural. I always think that most ghost stories are just products of the imagination. But the story I am about to tell, it really happened. That day, I came home earlier than usual. It was just getting dark, and the road to my apartment was as quiet as usual. But strangely, I felt something was wrong. I turned on more lights than usual. The TV was on, but I didn't pay attention. My heart was still beating fast. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been haunting me since I left the lake. I usually have the habit of walking around the lake every evening to relax. The small path was shaded by trees, the yellow streetlights reflected on the pitch-black water. That day was no different, until I realized I was not alone. I heard footsteps. They weren't too close, but enough for me to realize that someone, or something, was following me. I stopped. Silence. I turned around. The street was deserted. Only the wind blowing through the trees. I told myself that maybe I was imagining things. I kept walking. And then I saw it. At the edge of the lake, in the dim light, there was a dark figure. A dog. It stood still, its eyes glowing in the reflection of the streetlights. Strange eyes, too bright for normal. I stopped. The dog didn't move. Just stood there, looking at me. I tried calling softly. "Hey, puppy." No response. I blinked once. And it was gone. Not a sound. Not a trace. I tried to reassure myself that it had probably just disappeared into the darkness. But my heart started pounding harder. I walked quickly back home. I was going to let it go. But the next night, despite my reservations, I decided to go for a walk as usual. I didn't want to let a stupid nightmare control me. The lake was still as a mirror, the road was still deserted. I told myself that I was being too sensitive. Until I saw it again. The dark shadow looming behind the trees. The same eyes, shining brightly. But this time, it didn't disappear. I stood still, staring at it. My heart sank. I tried something different. I bought some snacks and put them on a bench. If it were a stray dog, it would surely come closer. But it didn't. It just stood there. Watching. Then quietly retreated into the darkness. I started to feel really worried. The third night. I almost gave up on the idea of going for a walk, but something urged me to go back to the lake. I didn't see the dog anymore. Maybe it was gone. Maybe I was overreacting. I sighed, slowing down. That night, the lake suddenly became strangely beautiful. The space was quiet, no longer feeling insecure. But then, just as I was about to leave, I heard it. A slight noise, right behind me. My neck stiffened. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. I didn't dare turn around. But the feeling was clear. Something was standing behind my back. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, took a deep breath, and turned around. The flashlight beam shone straight into the darkness. Nothing. I exhaled, chuckled. Maybe I was really being too suspicious. But when I turned around, a pair of bright eyes. Right in front of me. The dog. It stood less than a meter away from me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Its eyes were unlike any dog's I'd ever seen. Deep. Cold. I blinked. It was gone. I never went back to the lake. I didn't want to know what it was. I tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, I still felt like something was watching me. Out the window. In the dark alley below my apartment. I kept telling myself it wasn't there anymore. But one night, as I was turning off the lights to go to bed, I saw it. Out the window. Eyes glowing. Staring straight at me. Do you dare come back? Lonely night shift. I'm not the type of person who is easily affected by ghost stories. Really. I'm just a normal office worker, doing boring administrative work with endless piles of reports. I like working alone, no one bothers me, no one notices. So when the company moved to an old office building called The View, I didn't really mind. This old warehouse building was nothing special. Just one floor of offices with a few dozen offices, a long hallway, and a break room at the end. Most people just came and went, no one talked to anyone. It was the perfect environment for me. In the early days, I came in at 9 a.m., finished work and left at 5 or 6 p.m. No one bothered me. No one cared. But then, one time, I had to stay late. And that's when everything changed. Friday night. It was Friday, and I had an important deadline. I figured I could finish the report in a few hours, so I decided to stay until around 7. But when I looked at the clock, the hour hand had already moved to 8. The floor was eerily quiet. I looked away from the screen and stretched a bit. The hallway light near the elevator had automatically turned off, leaving only a faint glow from my office. There was no other noise except the hum of the old air conditioner fan. And then I noticed something. The light in the hallway across the street started flickering. That wasn't unusual. The lights here were old and flickering. But this time, it flickered in a steady rhythm, as if someone was turning a switch on and off. I tried to ignore it. It must be an electrical fault. But after 5 minutes, it was still flickering in that strange rhythm. I stood up, annoyed, to check. When I stepped out into the hallway, the lighting immediately stabilized. I blinked. No one was there. The entire floor was empty. The break room door was closed. The elevator area was dark. I took a deep breath, calming myself. I must be imagining things. I returned to my desk, put on my headphones, and continued working. But as soon as I pressed the first button, the volume in my headphones suddenly turned up to maximum. The music was so loud that I jumped, almost falling off my chair. My heart was pounding as I quickly took the headphones off. I stared at the screen, the volume icon showed normal. Why was the sound so loud? I tried turning the volume down to the lowest setting. Then I put the headphones back on. Immediately, the music blared again, louder than before. I took the headphones out again, my hands shaking this time. I bent down to check the jack, thinking it might be a hardware problem. But then something strange happened. Even though I had removed the headphones from my computer, the music continued to play. It was still loud, shrill, as if someone was still holding the play button. But my computer screen had gone black. I froze. That's when I realized, the music wasn't coming from the headphones anymore. It was coming from the space around me. I gasped, my hand clutching the headphone cable. And then, the music stopped abruptly. As if someone had pressed a pause button. In the eerie silence, I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. My scalp tingled, my breathing quickened. No, this was just a technical glitch. I tried to reassure myself. A strange electrical response. A system error. Nothing more. I decided to turn on the computer. It booted up normally. Everything seemed fine. But now, I couldn't concentrate anymore. My eyes kept glancing at the corner of the screen, the time was almost 9 o'clock. Outside the office, the building was dark. I felt a strong urge to leave immediately. But I still had one more report to finish. I forced myself to concentrate, to type the last part. But every little noise around me made me jump. My feet trembled unconsciously under the table. I felt the air in the room become stuffy, my chest tightened. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I saved the report, packed my things. Then walked out. As I headed towards the elevator, the hallway lights started flashing again. This time, I didn't turn back. I walked faster, pressing the elevator button repeatedly. But it seemed like it took forever to get there. My heart was pounding. I felt a chill run through me. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from my office. I stared at the elevator doors. Then suddenly, in the dim reflection of the metal doors, I saw a figure. Standing right behind me. I froze, my blood stopped flowing. Ding! The elevator doors opened. I rushed inside, pressing the close button repeatedly. I didn't dare look back. But before the doors closed completely, a voice whispered, right next to my ear. "See you next time." The building after sunset. I work in an office in an old building in the middle of the city. The work isn't too bad, mostly processing documents and sending emails, but there's one thing that bothers me: I can't stay up past sunset. Around 5:30 p.m., I start to fidget, glancing at the clock. Not because I'm in a hurry to get home, but because of an uneasy feeling that comes with each passing day. I can't explain it, but I know that this building changes at night. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But then, strange things started to happen. It was a rare evening when I had to stay late to finish an important report. The office was quiet, except for the clacking of keyboards. I put on my headphones, turned on some soft music to help me concentrate. But after a few minutes, the music suddenly stopped. I checked my computer. It was still on. My headphones were still connected. I tried playing the music again, no luck. Then I took my headphones off, and shuddered. From somewhere in the office, the music was still playing. Not from the speakers. Not from anyone else's computer. It was faint, as if it were coming from the air itself. I quickly took off my headphones, checked everything, but couldn't find the source. I turned off my computer, stuffed my things in my bag, and stormed out of the office. I didn't dare look back. I tried to convince myself it was just a software glitch. But a few days later, something else happened. This time, I didn't bring my headphones. I'd only stayed for another 15 minutes to finish some work. But when the clock hit 8 o'clock, the hallway lights started flickering. Not like the old dimming and brightening, like someone was controlling them to a rhythm. I looked down the hallway. It was darker than usual. Even with all the lights on, the hallway had a strange darkness, a gloom that crept into every corner. I felt like someone was watching me from afar. But there was no one. And then, I heard a door slam. There was no wind. There was no one else in the office but me. But the break room door slammed shut automatically, so loudly that it echoed down the hallway. I rushed out of the building immediately. When I got home, I tried to forget everything. But a memory suddenly came back to me, a memory I didn't want to remember. I opened a wooden box. It was an old box that I found on my grandfather's shelf after he passed away. I hadn't thought much about it until I opened it and saw a silver necklace with a strange pendant. When I touched it for the first time, a shiver ran through my body. Not pain, not numbness, but a small vibration, almost a weak electric current running through my hand. And a strong metallic smell that filled my nose. I didn't care at the time. I just thought it was an old thing, nothing special. But from that day on, things started to change. I couldn't sleep well. Strange dreams appeared, dreams of the office building, but empty, and something waiting for me in the dark. After that late night, I never let myself get stuck in the building after 7:30 p.m. again. But one night, due to a technical problem, I got stuck. I pressed the elevator. It didn't work. I tried the emergency exit. It was locked. I ran down the hallway, my heart pounding. And then I saw it. The lights were flashing in a certain pattern, but this time, I realized it wasn't random. They were spelling something. RONGBAC. I reached into my pocket. The silver necklace I had found in my grandfather's box was so hot that I almost let it go. I felt something approaching. I didn't dare turn around. I ran as fast as I could toward the exit. And just as I was about to reach the front door, the lights went out completely. In the absolute darkness, I heard breathing right behind me. The next morning, the security guard found me collapsed in front of the building. I can't remember what happened after the lights went out. But I never went back to the office again that night. I sold the necklace to an antique shop, hoping to escape it. But I knew. The building was still waiting. And if someone else touched the silver necklace, it would start again. At 8 p.m. The chain. The darkness of night covered my small apartment like a thick, stifling sheet. I woke up, feeling a cold sweat run down my spine. In the darkness, I heard a strange sound, a metallic scratching on wood. I reached up to turn on the nightlight. There were long, thin scratches on my left forearm. They weren't deep, but they burned. I touched them, and they stung. What was strange was that my nails were very short. There was no way I could have scratched myself like this. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. I scanned the room, trying to find a logical explanation. Nothing seemed out of place, just my familiar room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I felt sluggish. My arm still ached slightly, as if someone had left the marks there on purpose. I walked into the kitchen, intending to make a cup of coffee to wake me up. But as soon as I turned on the kitchen light, a strong metallic smell hit my nose. On the kitchen counter was an old chain, about a foot long. I didn't remember seeing it before. The silver color of the metal had been eroded by time, leaving a thin layer of rust. I touched it lightly. It was cold, as if it had just been taken from a place that didn't belong to this world. An uneasy feeling crept up on me. I decided to put it in a wooden box and shoved it into a drawer in the living room. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. Things got worse at night. I started hearing light footsteps on the wooden floor, just outside the bedroom. The footsteps were uneven, as if someone was slowly shuffling down the hallway. Every time I turned on the light, there was no one there. I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was just too stressed, I told myself that. But the nightmare wouldn't let me go. I found myself standing in the living room, the lights off. In front of me, on the floor, the chain glowed faintly. I bent down to pick it up, but my hand wouldn't move as I wanted. I touched the pendant on the chain. At that moment, an invisible force pulled me into darkness. I heard the wind, a hoarse laugh, and then something tightened around my neck. I woke with a start. The room was still dark. I was gasping for air, a cold sweat covering my body. I turned on the light. My arms were covered in fresh scratches, this time, on both sides of my arms and shoulders. I was starting to get really scared. The next morning, I went to see Marcus, my best friend. When I told him what had happened, he looked at me with a serious look. Maybe it's just stress, or maybe, you're touching something you shouldn't be touching. What do you mean? I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine. I'm not sure. But if it makes you feel uneasy, then don't keep it. I nodded. When I got home, I decided not to touch the chain anymore. I put it in the box, then put it on the highest shelf in the closet. But things only got worse. The invisible entity. That night, I couldn't sleep. The noises in the house became more and more distinct. The footsteps were no longer light, but more determined. I had the feeling that someone was standing right next to my bed, watching me in the dark. I tried to close my eyes, ignoring it. But just as I was about to fall asleep, an invisible hand gripped my chest. I was pulled through the hallway, unable to resist. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. In my panic, I saw a tall shadow, standing right by the closet. It had no eyes, no mouth, but I knew it was looking at me. I woke up, almost suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to take the chain out of the house. I drove to the river, intending to throw it away. But as soon as I opened the box, a sharp pain shot through my body. The chain was there, but it was no longer lifeless metal, it was breathing. I saw flashes of images. A man tied up, his wrists covered in blood. A dark room, where voices whispered incessantly. An ancient ritual, where someone put on this chain and disappeared forever. I understood. This chain was more than just an ordinary object. It was a curse. Whoever possessed it would never escape. I tried to throw it into the river, but an invisible force held me down. I couldn't let go. I screamed, trying to throw it away again. A strong wind blew, knocking me to the ground. When I looked back, the chain was gone. I thought I was free. But when I got home, my apartment was strangely empty. There was no sound. No footsteps. No buzzing. Just a wooden box on the table. I opened it. The chain lay there, glistening in the darkness. The screen faded. A laugh rang out. The haunting of an abandoned warehouse. I don't remember exactly why I agreed to explore the abandoned military warehouse with Mark. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the challenge, but now I wish I had never set foot in it. It all started on a cold late autumn afternoon. We found the old building hidden behind a dense row of trees. The outer walls were peeling, the windows were broken, revealing a dark interior like a gaping mouth waiting to swallow the unfortunate. Mark turned on his flashlight, the weak light illuminating the dusty space. We stepped inside, the cold air making me shiver. Inside, the air was thick with an ominous feeling. Metal tables were covered in dust, torn papers were strewn across the floor. Each step echoed, as if someone were following us. I tried to calm myself, but a strange feeling crept into my mind, the feeling that we were not alone. We continued exploring until Mark found an old, rusty cabinet with a broken lock. When he pulled the door open, a high-pitched screech made me jump. Inside was an old notebook, its leather cover worn and tattered. I picked it up, flipping through the yellowed pages filled with scrawled words, "Don't open the door. They're still here." My heart was pounding. "Mark, we should go now." But he just laughed, thinking that someone had written those words to scare me. I wasn't sure. Suddenly, a cold wind brushed the back of my neck, carrying a distant whisper. I turned around, but there was no one. The room was empty, save for the flickering light of a flashlight on the wall. We left soon after, but I knew it wasn't over. I hadn't slept well since that night. The scratching of the floor, the scraping of chairs in the living room, I heard them every night. My closet door was always slightly ajar in the morning, though I clearly remembered closing it. I began to dream of the dark hallway of the storage room, where my footsteps echoed in the endless space. One night, I dreamed that I was standing in front of that closet again. The door slowly opened with a horrible screech. Inside was no longer a notebook but a twisted black figure, with white eyes staring at me. A voice whispered in my ear, "You opened the door. Now you can't close it." I woke up in a cold sweat. My closet door was wide open. I called Mark, hoping he'd had the same experience, but he just told me it was over for him. "Maybe you're more sensitive to that place than I am," he said. But I was sure, that something had followed me. I couldn't live with this fear forever. I had to go back. I had to face it, or at least find out what had happened. That night, I returned to the warehouse. There was no Mark, no one, just me and the darkness. I stepped in, the flashlight in my hand shaking with each heartbeat. Everything was the same, except for one thing, the closet door was open. I swallowed, stepped closer. Part of me screamed, told me to run. But I couldn't. I looked inside. And this time, the shadow didn't just stand there. It rushed out. The screen went black. A scream. Reflection. I don't remember the exact night I first saw it, but I know the feeling of fear still haunts me to this day. It was a normal night. I woke up in the middle of the night thirsty. My small apartment was silent, only the ticking of the clock echoed in the darkness. I staggered out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floor. When I entered the kitchen, the ceiling light was bright enough to illuminate my reflection in the glass door to my right. I picked up my glass of water, but before I drank, I glanced at my reflection. And my heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. The image in the mirror seemed slightly distorted, as if it was a beat slower than mine. I squinted, stepping closer. My breathing became shallower as I realized, in the reflection, there was another figure standing right behind me. A shadowy outline, as tall as me, hunched over as if it were lurking. I froze. A chill ran down my spine, my hands gripping the glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. I didn't dare turn around. Part of me wanted to check to see if anyone was there, but most of me was afraid I'd see something I shouldn't. The figure shifted slightly. I spun around, arms raised defensively, heart pounding in my chest. But there was no one there. The kitchen was empty. The hallway was empty. I stood still for a long moment, breathing heavily, feeling like I'd just woken up from a nightmare. I told myself it was just an illusion. Maybe I was just too tired. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. In the nights that followed, I tried not to look at the glass door. I turned the kitchen light brighter, to avoid seeing my reflection too clearly. I started cutting back on my water intake at night, just to avoid going into the kitchen. But one night, I forgot. I woke up at 2 a.m., my throat feeling dry. In the darkness, I quietly walked out of the room, leaving only the living room light on, just enough to light my way. As I approached the sink, a creaking sound came from the corner of the kitchen. It could have been the plumbing or the refrigerator, but I couldn't stop my body from reacting. My shoulders stiffened, my heart clenched. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But then, I made a mistake. I glanced at the glass door. I saw my reflection, and right behind me, the shadow appeared again. This time, it was closer. Close enough that I could see the vague outline of its face. Its head was tilted slightly, as if it was staring at my neck. I froze. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen. My throat was dry, unable to form a single word. I could only stand there, staring at the reflection in absolute panic. And then, it moved. A very small movement, but enough to make me scream. I turned around immediately, but like before, there was nothing there. But this time, I could no longer convince myself that it was just my imagination. I knew what I had seen was real. I rushed to my bedroom and locked the door. All night long, I lay there, eyes wide open, listening to every little sound in the apartment. I couldn't sleep. That dark image haunted my mind. The next morning, I decided to check the apartment. I checked every corner, every door, every closet. There was no sign of anyone having broken in. But I didn't feel safe. In the days that followed, I began to feel like I was being watched. Whether I was in the office or walking down the street, I always felt like someone was watching me. I would often turn around in surprise, but I never saw anyone. Until one night. I sat on my bed, trying to forget my fear by swiping my phone. The light from the screen reflected on the ceiling. I decided to take a selfie to check my gaunt face. And when I looked at the photo, my heart stopped. Behind me, on the phone screen, was that figure. It was standing right behind me, its head still tilted at an odd angle, as if it was staring at my neck. I threw my phone, jumped out of bed, and ran to the door. But as I reached for the doorknob, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. "Don't come back." The mirror. I had lived in this apartment for almost 2 years. It was nothing special, a compact space with a living room, a kitchen, and a bedroom. Everything was pretty normal, until I started seeing the figure. It all started late one evening. I went into the kitchen to get some water, the light reflecting off the large glass door. As I raised the glass to my lips, I saw a blurry figure right behind me in the glass. My heart sank. I turned around, no one was there. Just 2 potted plants, a small stove, and a broom standing in the corner. I took a deep breath, telling myself that I was imagining things. But the chills still ran down my spine. In the days that followed, I couldn't forget that moment. I told myself it was probably the strange reflection of the light. So I bought a set of thick curtains to completely cover the glass. When I had them installed, I felt relieved. There was no more figure. That night, I slept a little better. But then, another night, I woke up in the middle of the night with a dry throat. Reluctantly, I walked into the kitchen. When I turned on the light, I paused. The curtains were pulled a little askew. A small section of glass was exposed. I didn't remember leaving them that way. I moved closer, pulling the curtains back into place. But for that brief moment, I saw the figure again, standing behind me, leaning forward as if watching. I panicked. Trying to stay calm, I pulled the curtains back quickly and left the kitchen. That night, I lay in bed, heart pounding, unable to sleep. The following nights, I carefully checked the curtains before going to bed, even stacking boxes in front of them so they wouldn't open on their own. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the other side of the glass. Then one night, I heard a noise from the kitchen, a sound like curtains rustling. I was so nervous that I couldn't move. But then, another sound rang out. A whisper, distorted, echoing through the space. "You are still here." I almost froze. Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to leave this apartment as soon as possible. But it didn't stop there. Late one evening in the company parking lot, I realized I had forgotten to check the electrical panel in the basement. The place was cold, the concrete walls were gray, the fluorescent lights flickered and emitted a low hum. As I walked down to the basement, the creepy feeling came back. My footsteps echoed in the empty space. I approached the electrical panel, opened the cover to check. Everything seemed fine, no signs of abnormality. I breathed a sigh of relief, preparing to turn away when a sound rang out behind me. "Don't leave." That distorted voice paralyzed me for a moment. I turned around. No one. But when I looked in the car window next to me, I saw it. A hunched figure, leaning forward, its empty eyes staring straight at me. I screamed, ran for the stairs, left the car, left everything. I don't know how I got home that night, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer alone. And it was still there, behind the glass, waiting patiently. I still lived in this apartment. The curtains were still closed every night, the boxes still blocked the glass. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I heard the curtain gently being drawn, and I knew it had never left. Floor 7. I got home later than usual on a Friday night. The apartment building was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights in the lobby ceiling hummed, emitting a dim light. I pressed the elevator button and waited. A ding sounded. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in, pressed the number 9, leaned against the elevator wall, and sighed. The day had been long. The numbers on the screen jumped up one floor at a time. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But when it reached 7, the elevator slowed down a bit, then stopped. The doors slowly slid open. The hallway in front of me was dark. Only a single light bulb on the ceiling flickered faintly. I couldn't see anyone outside. No one had pressed the elevator call button. A cold wind blew into the elevator. I felt goosebumps rise all over my body. Something was wrong. I quickly pressed the close button. Nothing happened. I pressed harder. The door didn't move. My breathing quickened. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, echoing from the end of the dark hallway. I couldn't see anything there. But I sensed something moving. My stomach clenched. I pressed the door close button repeatedly. This time, the door began to slide back. Just before it closed, a musty smell wafted into the cabin. Along with it, I heard a soft sigh just outside. The door slammed shut. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. The number on the display jumped to 8. 9. The door opened in front of my apartment. I rushed out, almost running toward it. My palms were sweaty as I inserted the key into the lock. Finally, I was inside. I slammed the door shut. I turned the latch. Take a deep breath. Try to convince yourself that it was all just your imagination. But as I stood there, a chill ran down my spine. For the next week, everything seemed normal. But every time I got into the elevator, I felt uncomfortable. I started to notice that the faint musty smell was still there, even if only slightly. Every time the elevator reached the 7th floor, I felt like someone was staring at me. Even though no one was there. I thought about telling the management, but what would I say? I feel cold when I pass the 7th floor. That sounded silly. I tried to ignore it. Until Friday night the following week. I got home at the same time as last week. The lobby was deserted. The overhead lights were flickering. No one was around. I got into the elevator. Press 9. The numbers jump up one floor at a time. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This time, I feel it right before the elevator stops. A cold breeze brushes the back of my neck. The number on the screen flashes at 7. The door slowly opens. The hallway is still dark. But this time, I see a faint shadow just below the flickering lights. I can't see clearly. But I know it's there. It's looking at me. I freeze. The elevator doors open completely. I can hear a rustling sound, like someone is walking toward me. I press the close button repeatedly. The doors move a little, then stop. The footsteps get closer. I look around the cabin. I'm alone. But for some reason, I can feel the breath of something right behind me. I pressed the button harder. This time, the door slid back a little, then suddenly opened again. The darkness of the hallway seemed to flow into the elevator. I heard a whisper. Very softly. Almost a soft breath right next to my ear. You saw it. The overhead lights flickered more loudly. I screamed. The door suddenly slammed shut. The elevator dropped a little, then stopped. The number on the screen jumped to 9. The door opened. I ran straight out, not looking back. I don't remember how I got into my apartment. But as soon as the door closed, I felt like something had been left outside. I tried to sleep that night. But as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps outside my apartment door. Slowly. Heavy. Stopping right in front of the door. I held my breath. Click. The doorknob turned slightly. But I had locked it. Click. I clutched the covers tightly, my heart pounding. After a few seconds, everything was quiet again. But I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, when I opened the door to go out, the musty smell was still there. Right in front of my apartment door. As if it had never left. Mysterious notes. I live alone in a small house on a quiet street. I work as a freelance web developer, spending most of my time in front of a computer screen. This house is my world, peaceful, familiar, no one comes or goes but me. But 2 weeks ago, things started to change. That Wednesday morning, when I walked into my home office, I saw a note stuck to a bulletin board, "Don't forget." The handwriting was shaky, distorted, almost illegible. I stared at it, trying to remember if I had written it. No, I definitely hadn't. I checked my phone, my planner, my email, nothing important to remember. Thinking it might have been stuck there long ago, I took it down, crumpled it, and threw it on the table. I continued my day, trying to ignore the strange feeling. But the next morning, another note appeared. This time, it said, "Late." I felt my heart beat faster. I checked the office door, still locked. The window closed. No one had a key but me. I checked the note from yesterday on the desk, it was still there. So who put this note on the board? I took a picture of the two papers and compared them. The handwriting matched, still slanted, crowded, as if the writer was in a hurry or shaking. But it was definitely not mine. That evening, I called my brother, the only person who might have had reason to play a prank on me. He laughed, saying that he hadn't been to my house in months. After the call, I felt uncomfortable. I decided to lock the office door when I went to bed, something I had never done before. The next morning, I opened the door to my office and froze. On the board, there was a new note. Check the time. I felt my chest tighten. I checked my computer, my watch, my phone, everything was on time. But the feeling of unease kept haunting me. I started checking the house, looking for signs of a break-in. But there was nothing unusual, no footprints, no broken windows, nothing missing. All the furniture was intact. I decided to install a hidden camera in my office to record everything at night. If someone entered the room, I would catch them. That night, I pushed a chair against the door, sitting listening to every little sound in the house. Nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the whir of the air conditioner. The next morning, I checked the camera with trembling hands. But the video showed only emptiness. No one had entered the room. Nothing had moved. And then, right in front of me on the board, a new piece of paper appeared. "Where are you?" I felt my stomach tighten. I shouted, my voice shaking. "Who's doing this?" No one answered. I ran around to check again. Nothing else was disturbed, no sign that anyone had been here. But the camera picked up something strange, the paper appeared without anyone touching it. I panicked. I thought about leaving the house for a while, but I knew that if I didn't find a solution, I would never feel safe. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening for the slightest sound. Then I heard it. A faint rattling sound, like someone was moving around in my office. I jumped up, my heart pounding. I picked up my phone and opened the app that connected to the hidden camera. The image on the screen almost made me drop my phone. The note board shook slightly, and then a piece of paper automatically emerged from behind the board, as if an invisible hand was pushing it out. The paper flipped back and forth a bit, then stopped, displaying a line of text. "I see you." I almost held my breath. I couldn't stay here anymore. I quickly packed my things, deciding to leave the house that night. But when I walked out the front door, I realized something even more terrifying. I looked at the noteboard one last time before leaving. There was a new piece of paper. A piece of paper that I was sure no one could put on it in a few short seconds. The words on it almost made me drop the keys in my hand. "Don't go. I don't know what's going on in that house, or who, or what, left those notes. But I do know one thing, I'm never going back there." Do you ever feel like someone is watching you, even when you know you're alone? Take a look around. You might find a note you don't remember writing. The house in the woods. I was tired of city life. The hustle and bustle, the fast pace, the crowded streets and cars, it all made me feel suffocated. I longed for somewhere quiet, a place where I could truly relax without being bothered. One day, while surfing the web, I came across an ad for a small, isolated house in the countryside. The owner promised that there were no neighbors for miles. The photos showed an old, one-story house surrounded by dense trees and a large lawn. It was exactly what I was looking for. Without hesitation, I booked the house for a week, quickly loaded my things into the car, and drove away without telling anyone where I was going. The trip took a little over 3 hours, and by the time I arrived, the sun was already setting in the west. The driveway to the house was just a small dirt road, lined on both sides with dense bushes. My wheels rolled over the gravel, making a long, rustling sound. As the house came into view, I slowly stopped the car and looked around. The house looked older than the pictures online. The roof was sagging in places, the paint on the outside was faded, and the window frames were covered in dirt. I opened the car door, stepped out, and took a deep breath. The air carried the damp scent of earth and pine. A gentle wind blew through the trees, making rustling sounds. No one was around. Not a soul. I stepped onto the porch, noticing a thin layer of leaves covering the wooden floor. The front door creaked slightly when I opened it. Inside, the small house was neat but simple. A small living room connected to the kitchen, a bedroom in the back, and a small bathroom next to it. The only furniture was a wooden table, 2 chairs, a couch, and an old single bed. There was no TV, just a radio on the shelf, but it was broken. I didn't mind. I just wanted a week of peace. The first night passed relatively peacefully. I made a simple dinner, sat reading by the dim yellow light until my eyes grew heavy. Everything was quiet, so quiet that it made me a little nervous. The only noise I heard was my own breathing and, occasionally, the creaking of the ceiling wood. I also heard a small rattling sound inside the wall. Probably mice. Nothing to worry about. At midnight, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and went to bed. I woke up at dawn. Not to the alarm clock. But to a strange sound. Footsteps. They echoed outside my bedroom window. Slowly. Cautiously. I held my breath, trying to listen better. The footsteps continued, then, stopped right outside the window. I was so nervous that I could hear my heart pounding. A chill ran down my spine. After a few minutes of silence, I mustered up the courage to walk to the window. I gently pulled back the curtains and shined my flashlight on the ground below. No one was there. I looked around, but saw no trace other than my own old footprints from yesterday. There was no sign that anyone or animal had just passed through here. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. The next day, I decided to explore around the house. I walked around to the back, where I found an old well, covered with a rotten board. A little further away, there was a small shed, which looked like it was about to collapse. A rusty padlock hung from the door. Curious, I looked inside through a small opening. The darkness inside didn't let me see much, but there was something, a strange feeling that made me not want to stand there any longer. I turned back to the house, trying to push the thoughts of this morning out of my mind. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. That night, I lit candles instead of turning on the lights, since the power in the house seemed unstable. As I sat reading, I heard another sound, a loud thump in the hallway. I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly walked down the hallway. Sweat began to form on my palms. I swept the light across the floor. Nothing. I opened the bathroom door. It was empty. I opened the bedroom door. Everything was the same. I went back to the living room, trying to convince myself that it was just the sound of wood creaking. Then came another sound. This time, it came from the kitchen. A heavy thump. I rushed to the kitchen, turned on every light I could. Nothing. The stove was still off, the cupboards were still closed, the back door was still locked. But I knew what I had heard. That night, I was awakened again. But this time it was not footsteps. It was a whisper. It rang right next to my ear, even though there was absolutely no one else in the room. Not words. Just a small, continuous sound, like an ancient mantra. My throat was dry. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I tried to hold my breath. Then, from the darkness, the bedroom door opened slightly. A shadow passed by. I wanted to scream. But my throat was tight. Outside, a strong wind suddenly blew through the uneasy sensation. The air in the room was thick, as if under an invisible pressure. I turned on my flashlight, scanning the area. The furniture was intact, nothing had moved. But then, a small sound, the sound of dripping water from the hallway. I turned my head, the flashlight's beam hitting a faint shape. It slid across the wall, flickering like a shadow that didn't belong there. I stumbled back, almost dropping the flashlight. When I regained my composure and shone the light in that direction, the shape was gone. A rush of adrenaline shot through me, making my legs tremble. I walked toward where it had appeared. There was only a faint stain on the wood. I touched it. It was cold. I pulled my hand back. I tried to convince myself that it was just a stress-induced hallucination. But the creepy feeling wouldn't go away. I checked the windows and doors, all were locked. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body tensed, listening for the slightest sound. In the middle of the night, a scratching sound came from the window. Soft at first, then fierce, like claws on wood. I jumped up, ran to the window, and threw it open. Outside, there was only darkness and the muddy ground after the rain. No one was there. My breathing became rapid. I quickly slammed the window shut. I tried to lie down, but the feeling of unease wouldn't let me go. I listened to the rain pattering on the roof, but mixed in with it was another sound, a distant whisper. I held my breath, straining my ears, but it quickly died away. The noise continued from the hallway. I picked up my flashlight and stepped outside. Muddy footprints appeared on the floor, leading from the living room to the back door. They looked like human footprints, but they were misshapen, as if there were too many toes. I touched the nearest one, the mud was still fresh. My heart was pounding. The back door was ajar. I was sure I'd locked it. I slammed it shut, but my anxiety was growing. I backed away, clutching the flashlight as my only weapon. If anyone was here, they hadn't left yet, I thought. I decided to leave the house. As I gathered my things, a sound came from the living room, something being dragged across the floor. I froze, but I didn't check. I zipped up my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and rushed to the front door. My hands were shaking so much that it took me a moment to open it. I didn't know if I was being followed, but the feeling of dread was nagging at me. When the door swung open, I rushed out as if escaping a nightmare. Outside, the cool morning air gave me a small relief. I quickly stuffed my bag into the car and turned to lock the door. That's when I saw. In the living room window, a dark figure stood there. Tall. Twisted. A chill ran down my spine. I blinked, and it was gone. I locked the door, ran to the car, and started it. As the tires crunched over gravel, I found myself breathing again. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I kept expecting to see a figure standing on the porch. But nothing. Back at the apartment, I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. It felt like something had followed me home. I didn't tell anyone the whole story. Maybe telling it would bring it back. I lay awake that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard small rattling noises somewhere in the apartment. Maybe it was just a plumbing fixture. Maybe it was the neighbors. But I couldn't be sure. I had escaped that house. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The mirror in the attic. I had been haunted by my family's attic since I was a child. No one in the family talked about it, and everyone brushed it off when I asked why we never went up there. It's just a storage place, they said. But I couldn't help but wonder. The attic door was always slightly open, as if inviting me. There was no lock, no chain. Just an old wooden door, its hinges rusted, sitting silently on the ceiling like a blind eye silently watching. One autumn afternoon, as yellow light filtered through the windows, I decided not to hesitate. I pulled out the old wooden ladder and climbed. Each step creaked under my weight. When my hand touched the handle, it felt colder than I had expected. The door opened with a long groan. Inside was darkness. The air smelled of mold, of old paper, of rotting cloth. I turned on my flashlight. The dim light caught the layers of dust floating in the air. Chests lined the walls, covered in a thick layer of dust. Some were locked, some were open, revealing tattered pieces of clothing, old books. But then I heard a sound. Chanting. It wasn't clear, just a low, distant hum, as if coming from another room, a room that didn't exist here. I turned, shining my flashlight into the darkest corner of the attic. A large mirror leaned against the wall. The old wooden frame was engraved with strange symbols, the swirling lines seemed to move in the dim light. The glass was covered in dust, but I could still make out my reflection. I moved closer, my heart pounding. As I reached up to brush the dust off the frame, the chanting suddenly grew louder. Not a single sound anymore, but a chorus of whispering voices. Cold. I felt a wind blow against my back, though no windows were open. I bent down, peering closely at the mirror frame. The symbols carved into it were unlike anything I had ever seen. Could they be letters? Symbols? I didn't know. But I knew one thing, they weren't static. They flickered, as if something were breathing inside them. I heard the sound of wood scraping against the floor. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from me. I turned my head, but saw nothing. But when I looked into the mirror, I saw something behind me. The darkness in the mirror was thicker than the loft I was standing in. It was like another space, a distorted room. And there, a figure stood silently. I turned around. There was no one. But when I looked back into the mirror, the shadow was getting closer. I wanted to run. But my legs were frozen. The chanting was now hissing, pressing down on my mind. I had a feeling that if I stood there any longer, I would never leave this loft again. I yanked off the nearby sheet and threw it at the mirror. For a moment, the chanting stopped. The air returned to silence. I staggered back, my heart still pounding. I didn't dare look in the mirror anymore. I turned and ran down the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I never went back to the loft again. But I knew one thing. The mirror was still there. And it was still waiting. Chanting in the mirror. I had never believed in the paranormal. But that changed the night I stepped out of the mirror. It all started when I moved into my family's old house. The two-story house had belonged to my great-grandfather, a man no one in my family ever mentioned much. The attic had long been abandoned and used. But one night, I heard a sound coming from above, a steady, distant chanting, as if coming from somewhere else. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to investigate. When I pushed open the attic door, the sound was still there, but no one was there. There were only dusty old chests and a large mirror leaning against the wall. The carvings on the frame bothered me. They looked like ancient characters, but there was something off, like they were moving when I wasn't looking directly at them. I moved closer, looked into the mirror. And I saw myself, but, not me. My reflection seemed distorted. My eyes in the mirror were darker, deeper. And I realized it wasn't moving like me. As soon as I realized it, the reflection's lips moved slowly, making whispers, the same chanting sounds I'd heard. I jumped back, my heart pounding. As I turned and walked out of the loft, still staring at the mirror, I had the feeling that someone was watching me. After that night, I couldn't sleep. The feeling of something watching me grew stronger. I decided to forget about the loft for now, but something else caught my attention, an old diary. I don't remember opening it, but the next morning, it was open on my desk. On the page, in pale red ink, was a scrawled line. 7:15 a.m., brushed teeth. I shivered. That was exactly the time I brushed my teeth this morning. But I had never written it down. I checked every window, every lock on the front door, every corner of the house. No one was there. But as I continued to flip through the diary, the notes became more ominous. 9:03 a.m., drank coffee. 12:47 p.m., checked phone 3 times. 2:15 p.m., felt someone was staring. The last line broke out in a cold sweat. Because right then, I had felt eyes on me. I put the diary down, trying to calm myself. But then, on the third night, a new note appeared. Tonight, 3 a.m., opened attic door. I swallowed. I didn't write that. And I didn't mean to. But I was wrong. I tried to ignore the words. I told myself I would sleep well and forget about it all. But at exactly 3 a.m., I woke up. Not from a nightmare. Not from the alarm. But from the open door of the attic. I don't remember getting out of bed. I don't remember going up the stairs. But there I was, right at the threshold of the attic, my hand touching the doorknob as if I had opened it myself. Inside, the mirror was still in the same place. But this time, the image in the mirror didn't reflect the attic. It reflected somewhere else. A cold room, with walls covered in carved characters, white cloths hanging loosely as if they were hiding something. And in the middle of the room, there was a person standing there. No, not a person. It was me. I stood in the mirror, staring at myself with a blank gaze. My lips in the mirror parted slightly, emitting a steady chanting sound. The loft darkened. I couldn't move. My reflection raised its hand, but I didn't move. A crooked smile stretched across the other face, and then I saw it speak. It's time. The room spun. An invisible force pulled me toward the mirror. I struggled, but my legs lost all feeling. For a split second, I saw my image reach out of the mirror, to replace me. I don't remember what happened after that. When I woke up, I was in my bedroom. But things were not the same anymore. The next morning, I checked the diary. A new line had appeared, the handwriting no longer scribbled but neat and clear. Don't check the mirror. But I couldn't resist. I walked to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. It was still me. But something was wrong. I lifted my hand, slowly, to check. The image in the mirror did the same thing, but there was just one problem. I didn't lift my hand first. The image in the mirror did it before I did. I wasn't me anymore. And someone, or something, had taken my place. My apartment was small but tidy. I had lived here for 3 years without any strange occurrences. But one evening, as I sat working, I heard a slight noise. A click. I turned around, the cupboard door was slightly open. A wooden box lay on the floor, its lock still intact. I frowned. The box should have been on the shelf, locked. I put it back. But the next moment, I felt something was wrong. I looked again, the box was sitting on the shelf, as if it had never been moved. My back went cold. But that was only the beginning. The next day, I found an old leather-bound notebook on my desk. I didn't remember ever owning it. When I opened it, I saw that the pages were filled, in red ink. What was even more terrifying was the content inside. 8:15 a.m., he woke up, his eyes still tired. 8:20 a.m., made coffee, but forgot to add sugar. 9:45 a.m., he felt like someone was watching him. My hair stood on end. It recorded every single thing I did, every single thought that crossed my mind. I tried tearing out a page. But when I opened the notebook again, the page was still there, as if it had never been touched. I shoved it into a drawer and locked it. But the next morning, it appeared on my bed, wide open, writing on. This time, it not only wrote about what I did, but also recorded thoughts I had never said. He is reading this with horror. He is thinking about burning it. But if he does, he will regret it. I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding. Since I got the diary, my apartment has been anything but normal. At night, I hear footsteps in the hallway. When I turn off the lights, I can see shadows gathering in the corners of the room. They have no clear shape, just dark patches that seem to move, as if they are watching me. Once, when I passed the mirror, I saw a blurry figure standing behind me. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. I tried writing in the diary. "Who are you?" After a few seconds, new words appeared, not in my handwriting. "I'm always here." I threw the notebook to the ground, breathing heavily. I wanted to throw it away. But when I picked it up, the next page had words written on it. "Don't do it." I panicked. I threw it into the fire, but it didn't burn. The pages just turned black strangely, as if burned into another dimension, but still intact. A final line appeared, sharper, darker. "I warned you." From then on, I no longer felt safe in my own apartment. Every night, I heard the sound of pages turning. No matter where I locked the diary, it was always there next to me when I woke up. The shadows grew more and more visible. I could feel their cold breath on my back as I slept. I knew I was no longer in control of my life. But maybe I never really had control in the first place. The whisperer in the woods. I never thought that a simple night hike could turn into a nightmare. I liked the quiet, the sound of my footsteps blending with the natural sounds of the forest. That's why I chose an old, remote trail, a place where few people set foot. I drove to the entrance of the trail, parked in a clearing where only darkness fell between the dense rows of pine trees. As I entered the forest, the flashlight in my hand illuminated the path littered with dry leaves and tree roots. A gentle wind blew through the branches, carrying the smell of damp earth. I felt calm, even happy. But that feeling didn't last long. After about half an hour of walking, fog began to appear. At first it was just a thin mist, but then it thickened, swallowing the light of my flashlight. I felt like I was entering another world, where everything became hazy, distorted. I tried to ignore the unease and kept walking. Then I heard it. A soft whisper, like a breeze, came from up ahead. I stopped, straining my ears. There was nothing but the rustling of leaves. I shone my flashlight around, seeing only twisted trees and thick darkness. I told myself it was just the wind, but as I walked, the whispering came again. I tried to ignore it, but then I began to notice fleeting movements in my peripheral vision. Tiny shadows moved between the trees. Every time I turned around, they disappeared. My mind tried to make sense of it, maybe it was the fog, or the flashlight shining through the branches. But the deeper I went, the more distinct the shadows became. Suddenly, a branch snapped to my right. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand. There was nothing but fog and overlapping tree trunks. But there was something strange, I felt something move, but I couldn't see it. This time, I was really scared. I checked my phone, no signal. I started to think about turning back, but when I looked around, I wasn't sure I was going in the right direction anymore. Everything looked the same, the trees, the fog, the darkness. And then I heard it. My name. Someone, or something, whispered my name right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam flaring wildly. There was no one there. But I could feel a presence. My throat tightened, my heart pounding wildly. I shouted, "Who's there?" but only the wind whistling through the trees answered me. I started walking faster, almost running. I didn't care about finding a way anymore, I just wanted to get out of this place. But the forest didn't seem to want to let me go. The shadows became more frequent. They weren't just standing still, they were moving, gliding past me, lurking behind trees, and, seemingly getting closer. Then, I saw it. A few meters away, in the thick fog, a shape loomed. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was tall, thin, with unnaturally long legs and slender arms that reached to the ground. Its face, nothing but a dark void. It didn't move. It slid closer to me. I froze. My heart stopped. Cold seeped through my bones. A sound echoed in my head, a hoarse, whispering voice, soft but haunting. "You're going too far." Suddenly, everything shattered. The fog swirled, the blackness wavered, and I heard a cacophony of sounds, footsteps, groans, gasps, all of it coming together in a chaotic storm. I turned and ran. I ran aimlessly, stumbling, clawing at branches, ignoring my aching legs. The whispers still followed me, like a cold wind in my ears. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. After an indefinite amount of time, I saw light, the light reflecting off my car. I rushed over, opened the door, and jumped in, slamming the door shut. My heart pounded as I hurriedly started the car. But just as I was about to drive away, I looked in the rearview mirror. Between the dark trees, a tall, thin shadow stood. It didn't chase. It just stood still, looking at me, though I couldn't see its eyes. And then, slowly, it raised an arm, as if to say goodbye. I didn't hesitate a second longer. I stepped on the gas, and sped away from the woods. I never went back that way. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear a soft whisper coming from the darkness. And I know, it's still there. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. It felt like something was in the apartment, even though I knew for sure that no one was there. Strange noises echoed in my mind, like bare feet running over metal beams. I tried to breathe deeply, telling myself it was just my imagination, but when I picked up the phone to check the walls, I swore I heard the noise. During the day, everything seemed normal. The office was bright, people were busy working, the sound of phones ringing and keyboards tapping drowned out all other sounds. I tried to bury myself in my work to forget the strangeness of the night, but the tension still smoldered inside me. Things changed when it got dark. The office was quiet, the space felt large and empty, the air felt stale. Every time I heard a rattling sound on the ceiling, my heart pounded. I checked around constantly, peering into vents and dark corners, worried that I would see that hand again. One day, I decided to share my concerns with Alan, a coworker. I mentioned vaguely that someone might have snuck into the building through the old maintenance shafts. Alan just laughed and said that it wouldn't be surprising if someone lived in the abandoned basement. His words did not ease my mind, but only made me more worried. I called the building management office to report the strange sounds after hours. A maintenance man was sent to investigate. He tapped on the wall, shined a light into a few vents, and said he found nothing. "Maybe rats or pigeons came in through the roof," he said. Then he set a few mousetraps in the closet and called it a day. There was no more thorough inspection. That night, I stayed late to finish some unfinished tasks. Around 9 p.m., the power suddenly flickered. The lights dimmed and then came back on. The air became heavy. I heard a slight rattling on the ceiling, the sound moving from one side of the room to the other as if someone was crawling on it. I stood up, my heart pounding, trying to locate the source of the sound. Suddenly, a ceiling panel in the far corner caved in, as if someone had pressed hard on it. I quickly picked up my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it on that corner. As soon as the light hit, the ceiling panel returned to its original position, but dust from the ceiling slowly fell. I didn't say a word, just slowly backed out of the office. As soon as I reached the hallway, I heard a scratching sound on the wall, this time right behind me, very close to the door I had just come out of. I ran to the elevator, cursing under my breath. My heart was beating so fast that I felt a sharp pain in my chest. When I got out on the street, breathing in the cold air, I gradually calmed down. The security guard gave me a strange look, but I didn't care. From that day on, I never stayed in the office after 7 p.m. again. But work didn't always go my way. One Friday night, I was forced to stay behind to finish an important financial report. The feeling of anxiety lingered all evening. I tried to play soft music to drown out any small noises. But around 11 p.m., I took off my headphones to make a phone call, and right then, I heard a light scratching sound behind the nearest partition wall. Feeling a chill down my spine, I turned on the flashlight on my phone and approached the wall. As I tapped lightly with my knuckles, the scratching suddenly became more frantic, as if something was reacting to me. I pulled my hand back, my eyes darting around the ceiling, the corners, the vents. I didn't want to see that hand again. I didn't want to see a face appear in the cracks. Suddenly, there was a thud, as if something heavy had fallen on a beam inside the wall. I jumped back, my breath coming in short gasps. My phone buzzed, making me panic even more. It was a text from the building system, alerting me to an overnight HVAC inspection. I tried to steady my breathing, but the scratching continued, this time moving. It slid along the wall, as if dragging its fingernails along with me. I couldn't ignore it. I followed it down the hallway, terrified but determined not to let it disappear without a trace. As I approached the corner office, where I'd seen the hand, I noticed the crack in the wall was still there, small but noticeable. I raised my flashlight, shining it into the crack. The darkness inside seemed to shift. I held my breath. A faint breath, or maybe a low hiss, came from within. And then I saw it. Footsteps in the night. Late at night. The room was dim, save for a faint yellow glow from the streetlights filtering through the curtains. I sat on the bed, my legs drawn up, my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't know what it was, or why it was here. But one thing was certain, I no longer felt safe. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I expected to see movement. A shadow. A vague shape. But nothing. Just heavy silence, just the thick darkness of my small apartment. I clenched my phone in my hand. Maybe I could call my landlord tomorrow morning. Maybe I could find another apartment next week. But right now, all I could do was sit here, waiting for dawn. I didn't think I could sleep tonight. And I wouldn't open that window again. I arrived in this city late in the afternoon. The sun was slowly setting behind the old roofs, covering the streets in a pale yellow. This was an ancient city, famous for its winding alleys and quiet corners, where whispers echoed in the dark. I had heard rumors about this place. Stories of shapeless ghosts, invisible footsteps following lone travelers. I used to laugh at such urban legends. I had traveled to many places, heard countless myths, most of them exaggerated or simply jokes. And yet, as I stepped off the bus, a strange feeling crept across my skin. Like an invisible cold wind. The air smelled of time. Tall, gray buildings stood still like ancient ghosts. The streets were deserted, only a few pedestrians passed me silently, their faces hidden behind scarves or the shadow of their hats. I had a reservation at a small hotel, but I wanted to walk around first. I wanted to see for myself the rumors. My footsteps echoed on the uneven cobblestone sidewalk. The old streetlights flickered, casting faint circles of light on the ground. I heard my own footsteps echoing, but something was wrong. Every time I stopped, the sound continued. I turned around, but there was only an empty street behind me. The windows of the houses were covered with thick curtains or tightly closed shutters. There was no one. It was just my imagination. I kept walking, but the feeling of being watched did not go away. A small convenience store was nestled on the side of the deserted street. The neon sign flickered faintly, its blue-white light illuminating the dim street. I pushed the door open and entered, a small bell rang. Inside, there was the smell of old wooden shelves, of overripe fruit. A man stood behind the counter, his eyes glued to the small TV in the corner. I walked up to the counter, feeling the comforting warmth of the light. I've heard rumors about this place, whispers and shadows. The man looked up, looking at me with lazy eyes. Nonsense. People here like to scare strangers. But then his voice dropped a little. "Still, it's better to be careful at night." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer, just shook his head and leaned over the counter. I didn't ask any more. I bought a bottle of water, then turned back outside. Night had fallen, and the air had suddenly become heavier. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe. I quickened my pace, hoping to get back to the hotel soon. Footsteps echoed on the sidewalk. This time, I was sure they weren't mine. I glanced at my phone. It was almost midnight. I turned onto a side street where the light was dimmer. My heart pounded as I heard a light tapping behind me. Like claws on concrete. I stopped, turned around. Nothing. Just darkness. I clenched my phone, forcing myself to keep going. I came to an intersection with no streetlights. The buildings on either side were boarded up, the bricks covered in dust and black residue. I turned on my phone's flashlight, shining the light forward. On the opposite wall, there was a strange symbol. A circle with lines crisscrossing it. It wasn't new, the lines were faded, as if it had been there for decades. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Then I heard it. A light scratching sound. Right behind me. I turned, my heart pounding. I raised my flashlight and shone it behind me. No one. But this time, I knew I wasn't imagining things. I could feel it. Something was standing in the darkness, just a few feet away from me. The air was thick. I couldn't move. But I knew I couldn't stay here. I swallowed, gripped my phone, and walked. My footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, matching the pounding in my chest. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking forward. The darkness behind me was getting thicker. But I didn't stop. There was only a short distance to the hotel. I had to get out of here. I had to. I moved into this apartment 3 months ago, not a fancy place but within my budget. At first, everything seemed normal, until the calls started. There was no pattern: morning, noon, afternoon, evening, even midnight. Every time I picked up, I heard heavy breathing on the other end, then the signal was cut off. No words, no identification. I thought it was a mistake, but the calls kept coming, and coming more and more each day. I told Mr. Davidson, the building manager, about this. He just shrugged and said it was fine. To prove it, he called my landline from his cell phone, and it worked. "See," he said, as if I was imagining things. But I knew the calls were real. I started unplugging the phone at night to avoid being disturbed, but during the day I kept it plugged in, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. I called the phone company, and they said there were no problems with the line. I began to suspect that the previous tenant, Jay, might have left the number with someone else. But that didn't explain why the calls were just breathing. One night, around midnight, the phone rang. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. "Hello?" No one answered. Just breathing, slow, labored. I tried to stay calm. Talk or don't call. On the other end of the line, a faint mumble sounded, as if someone was trying to say something but couldn't make it out. Then there was a loud static noise, and then the signal went dead. I put the phone down, my heart pounding. There was something about the sound that made me shiver, like someone was calling my name. In the days that followed, I didn't dare plug in the phone. I wrapped the cord around it, put it in the closet, and closed the door. I told myself it was over. But every time I walked past the closet, I felt like it was still waiting, ready to ring at any moment. I continued to live in that apartment, but I no longer felt safe. I began to hear little noises at night, a rattle on the walls, distant footsteps in the hallway, even when no one was there. I always felt like someone was watching me. But there was nothing I could do but wait. And then, one night, as I was drifting off to sleep, a familiar sound rang out. The phone rang. But I had unplugged it. The phone was still in the closet. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding. The ringing continued, long and persistent. I couldn't ignore it. Finally, I stood up and walked to the closet. My hands shook as I opened the door. The phone lay there, the cord still wrapped tightly. But it kept ringing. I picked it up and held it to my ear. Nothing but breathing, closer, clearer than ever. And this time, I heard a voice. Whispering, but desperate. I'm right here. The mystery behind the walls. I had never believed in ghost stories or strange mysteries. I always thought that everything had a logical explanation, until I discovered a hidden room behind the walls of my new house. I had not moved here long ago. The house was in a quiet rural area, far from the city, the only place I could find an affordable home. From the outside, it was nothing special, an old two-story house with peeling paint and loose wooden shutters that rattled in the wind. I liked the quietness of it, liked the feeling of being alone. But from the first night, I knew something was wrong. When I went to bed, a strange smell hit me, cigarette smoke, very strong. But I lived alone, and I had never smoked. I checked every corner, but found nothing. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a lingering smell from the previous owner. But the unsettling feeling didn't go away. One morning, I decided to explore further. I took a flashlight and looked in every corner of the house, especially in the closet in the master bedroom, where I had noticed something a little strange. Scratches. On the wall behind the closet, there were deep, long scratches, as if someone had scratched it with a fingernail or something sharp. I ran my fingers over the surface, and it felt rough. My heart pounded. That wasn't normal. I continued to check around and found something else, black burn marks on the corner of the wall, as if someone had pressed a hot object against it. When I touched it, it felt like burnt wood. Along with that, the smell of cigarette smoke seemed to be thicker. Has someone been here before? I began to feel uneasy. It felt like I was trespassing somewhere that didn't belong. But I couldn't stop. I examined the floor, and found a slight unevenness. In the far corner of the small room, when I pressed my heel down, the floor sank about half an inch, then stopped. A trap. A secret cellar. I took out my pry bar, trying to pry up the board. It just bent, made a cracking sound, but didn't spring. I tried again, harder, but still. Nothing changed. A feeling of anxiety began to spread through me. If this was a secret passage, who had used it? And could they still be here? I decided to leave the room. I walked quickly out onto the porch, took deep breaths of fresh air, and tried to calm myself. From the outside, the house looked completely normal. No one passing by would think there was a secret inside. What should I do? Ignore it? Seal it and never come back? Or should I find out? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining someone sitting in the dark, inside the hidden room, smoking and leaving scratches on the wall for reasons I couldn't understand. I kept hoping to hear some noise, some sign that I wasn't alone. But there was only silence. And that silence was more terrifying than any noise. I decided not to give up. I would search the house records at the town hall, see if there were any plans or notes about modifications, secret rooms. Maybe I would find out who had built this fake wall and why. But that would take time. And while I waited for answers, I had to live here, in a house where I wasn't sure if I was really alone. Every morning, I check my closet, making sure nothing has changed. I keep the door closed at night. I sleep with a flashlight on my nightstand. But I can't deny one thing, every time I think about that room, my chest feels tight. Something is wrong here. And I have a hunch, this story isn't over yet. The mysterious bell. I came to this city with the desire to start a new life. New job, new environment, I needed a place to settle down. When I saw a small apartment in an old building, cheap and close to work, I immediately agreed to rent it without hesitation. After signing the contract on a Monday afternoon, I stood outside the building, looking up. The peeling paint, high windows and dust evoked an indescribable feeling. The landlord said the place had been empty for years, but I didn't care. I just wanted a place to live. The first night. When I entered the apartment, I immediately realized that there was something wrong with the atmosphere. There was a musty smell in the air. The apartment was larger than I expected but old, covered in dust. A lone couch sat in the corner, next to a floor lamp tilted to one side. On the wall of the hallway, I noticed an old beige rotary phone. The wire was twisted, the plastic near the earpiece worn. I was curious and tried dialing. To my surprise, I heard a signal sound. I picked it up and listened. The sound was clear, nothing unusual. I put the phone down, shrugged, assuming that the line was still working somehow. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The air was heavy around me, as if something invisible was watching. Sometimes, I heard noises from the hallway, like someone walking in the dark. Every time I turned on the flashlight to check, the hallway was completely empty. The next evening, when I got home after a long day, the apartment was unusually quiet. I turned on the air conditioner, took off my coat, and ring, ring, ring. The rotary phone rang. I was stunned. No one knew I lived here. I didn't even know the number. I hesitated for a few seconds and picked up. Hello. No answer. Just a small sound, like static, then maybe a soft breath. Who is it? I asked, feeling a chill down my spine. No answer. Just a click, the call was disconnected. I put the phone down, feeling uneasy but trying to reassure myself that it was probably a wrong call. The next day, at noon, the phone rang again. I picked it up and heard the same sound as before, static, a soft breath, then disconnection. This time, I didn't take it as a coincidence. I began to feel that something was wrong. That evening, I went to see Mr. Davidson, the building manager. Is the apartment I rented before occupied? Oh, it's been empty for at least 5 or 6 years, maybe longer. Why? Has anyone ever wired a phone? He shook his head, looking at me strangely. No one lives there, so who uses the phone? His answer sent shivers down my spine. If no one had wired it, why would the phone still work? The tension escalated. That night, the phone rang twice. Both times I picked it up, only to hear faint breathing before the call was cut off. I began to panic. I went through every corner of the apartment, opened every closet door. There was nothing but dust and eerie silence. I pulled the phone cord from the hook, thinking that would stop it. But an hour later, it rang again, even though the cord had been unplugged. I froze. This couldn't be happening. I pulled up a chair, sat in front of the phone, and waited. But that night, it didn't ring again. The next morning, I decided to try calling a number from the old phone. I dialed the number of a nearby coffee shop, but instead of hearing a ring, I heard a familiar sound, a faint breathing sound right next to my ear. I hung up, my hands shaking. Who had I called? Or was it me who was being called? As I was about to rush out of the apartment, a thought flashed through my mind. I turned back, staring at the dial phone. I picked it up again. This time, there was a whisper on the other end. A hoarse, distorted voice said, "Don't stay there." I threw the receiver down hard, and rushed out of the apartment without looking back. As I ran down the stairs, I heard the phone ringing behind me, the sound seemed to echo throughout the empty building. The screen faded to black. The ringing echoed in the darkness. The scenery outside was reflected in the glass window. I saw my own pale image, my eyes dark from sleepless nights. Around 2 a.m., I heard light footsteps again, this time in the living room. A shiver ran down my spine, and I tiptoed down the hallway. The space was pitch black. As I got closer, a chill ran through me as I caught a glimpse of a figure standing by the couch. I took a sharp breath, my mind blank. I immediately turned on the light switch, but the figure was gone. All that remained was my own rapid breathing and pounding heartbeat. I stood still for a long time, not daring to move. The next morning, exhausted and anxious, I decided to ask the landlord about the history of the apartment. In the cramped office on the ground floor, he listened without showing any emotion. I asked if anyone had ever complained about strange phenomena, but he just shrugged, answering perfunctorily, "People come and go." His seemingly unwillingness to delve into the subject made me even more uneasy. At the office, I couldn't concentrate. Every loud sound startled me. My boss asked if I was okay, but I just said I was sleep-deprived. On the way home, the sky was gray, predicting more storms to come. When I got home, I threw my coat on the chair and headed straight for the window. The wind whistled through the cracks, and I immediately pulled the curtains shut, hoping that would hide the creepy presence. Around 9 p.m., the sound returned. Footsteps echoed from the kitchen to the living room. I sat on the bed, clutching the phone, contemplating whether to call the police. But what would I say? There was no intruder, just strange noises and a fleeting figure. Lightning split the sky, light flashed behind the curtains, thunder shook the walls. I clutched my flashlight, walking slowly toward the living room. My socks slid lightly on the hardwood floor, each step heavier. When I got to the window, I stopped. A dark figure stood just behind the curtains. My hands shook, the flashlight wavered as it touched the fabric. A soft sigh sounded, or was it just my imagination? Gathering my courage, I yanked the curtains open, shining the light outside. Nothing. But the air seemed heavier. Then a new sound appeared, a light tapping on the glass. My heart sank. I moved closer, pressing my hand to the cold window. Wiping away a patch of steam, I looked out. The dark rooftops across the street were hidden by the lightning. No one was there. But then, the shadow appeared, faint, shifting as if it were inside the glass. Fear welled up in me, and I backed away, stumbling into a chair. The figure disappeared. I spent the next hour turning the lights on and off, checking every corner of the apartment, but found nothing unusual. Stepping out into the hallway, I quietly watched the neighbors' doors, wondering if they had heard anything. But it was too late to knock, and I didn't want to appear panicked. I placed a chair near the window, flashlight in hand, and waited. Rain pounded against the glass, the wind howled. Every now and then, I sensed a shadow, but whenever I looked closely, there was nothing there. By 3 a.m., the storm had dissipated. I fell asleep, physically and mentally exhausted. The next morning, I woke up with a fear I couldn't name. Life here. I wasn't sure how much longer I could endure. The lifestyle. I'm not the type to panic. I've lived alone for years, in a small apartment on the top floor of an old apartment building. The building wasn't the best in town, but it wasn't dangerous either. I'd always felt safe, until that night. I got home later than usual. The hallway light was flickering strangely, but I didn't pay much attention. When I opened the door to my apartment, I knew right away that something was wrong. Clothes and papers were strewn across the floor. But the scariest thing was that there was no sign of forced entry. The front door was closed, with no sign of forced entry. I never locked it, a bad habit I now regretted. The building manager heard me calling and came to check. He leaned out the window, shining a flashlight along the ledge. There was only dust and darkness. No one was there. I felt a chill run down my spine. If no one had broken in through the front door, could someone have come in through the window? But my apartment was on the top floor, there was no way anyone could have climbed in. We searched everywhere. Nothing was missing. My laptop was still there, my passport, watch and important documents were intact. There was just one strange thing: someone had been rummaging through my belongings. Shirts and pants were pulled out of the closet, receipts and old papers were scattered about. It wasn't like everything had been randomly tossed around, it was like someone was looking for something. But looking for what? The manager suggested I check the security cameras. We only had one camera at the main entrance. But with its poor quality, the chances of seeing the intruder were slim. He left to check the other floors, and I locked the door carefully for the first time in months. I checked my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. I thought about calling the police, but then stopped. What would I tell them? That someone had come into my apartment, rummaged through my stuff, but taken nothing? My hands were still shaking as I checked the apartment again. Nothing was missing, but an uneasy feeling still clung to me. I sat down in a chair, trying to calm myself. But then I glanced at the window. A possibility ran down my spine: if the intruder hadn't left through the front door, he might still be in the building. I clenched my fists, staring at the door as if it might swing open at any moment. I didn't dare leave the apartment. What if I went out and ran into him? About an hour later, the manager returned. He said there had been no signs of forced entry on any other floors, and the security cameras hadn't picked up anything suspicious. You should lock your door at all times, he advised. And call the police tomorrow morning. I nodded, but I didn't feel any relief. The manager seemed concerned, but not entirely surprised, as if he had seen too many strange things in the building. A sleepless night. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound in the building startled me. Footsteps on the stairs, a door opening and closing somewhere, the rustle of a water pipe, everything suddenly seemed suspicious. I checked the window 3 times, making sure it was locked. I even pulled a chair up to block the door, a temporary defense. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I finally got some sleep near dawn, but then I was woken up by a knock on the door. It was the police. They came to take my statement. But they found no evidence of a break-in. No one else in the building had reported anything missing. There was no sign of forced entry. It could have been some homeless person who got into the wrong room, one of the officers said. You should be more careful anyway. They left without a clue. The old and secret house behind. I tried to go about my life as normal, but the unsettling feeling wouldn't go away. I locked my doors at night, checked my windows, kept my phone within reach. But every time I thought about the mysterious intruder, I shuddered. A few months later, I received word that I had inherited a house from an uncle I had never met. I hadn't planned on spending the summer in a rundown old house, but I had no choice. When I arrived, I immediately sensed something was wrong. From the outside, the house looked sturdy. But inside, there was a strange atmosphere, the smell of old wood, narrow hallways, and small rooms that felt strangely cramped. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The layout of the walls didn't make sense. Some hallways were too short. A closet jutted out at an odd angle, like there was a space behind it. And when I pushed it open, I saw a door. An old door, covered in dust. With a broken lock. Just like the door to my house the night the mysterious intruder appeared. I held my breath, feeling a chill run down my spine. I didn't know who had entered my apartment that night. The ghost in the mirror. The clock ticked toward 1 a.m. The highway stretched on forever, plunged into darkness. There were no other cars, no streetlights, only faint reflectors on the pavement that flickered in the headlights. I had been driving for hours, trying to get through this remote area before I was exhausted. The radio in the car was just a static noise, mixed with the voice of some presenter. But I no longer paid attention to it. What caught my attention was the reflection in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just a play of light. A blur, perhaps a tired illusion. But then I realized it was becoming clearer. For the first time, I saw the outline of a face. Then thin lips, slightly parted. But what sent a chill down my spine were the eyes, or rather, the deep, dark holes, as empty as an endless void. I suddenly pressed down on the accelerator. The speed increased rapidly, the engine roaring like a scream in the dark night. My entire body tensed. My shoulders ached from holding the steering wheel so tightly for so long. I glanced at the mirror again. The figure was closer. A heavy feeling filled the air in the car. Then I felt a warm breath on the back of my neck. The air conditioner was turned forward. There was no reason for there to be warmth behind me. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. I dared to speak, my voice trembling. "Who's there? I know you're there." There was no answer. There was only the static of the radio and a strange sound, like someone was whispering through the static. I felt the presence behind me growing stronger. I didn't dare turn around. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw the figure moving. It wasn't sitting still in the passenger seat. It was inching closer to me. I gripped the steering wheel, staring straight at the road. But when I glanced sideways, its face was close to the seat next to me. It wasn't quite there. It was flickering between existence and nothingness. But I could see its pale lips moving, as if it was trying to say something. I was startled and swerved the wheel. The car lurched across the road, tires screeching. I struggled to keep my balance, my heart pounding. I shouted, "Leave me alone." There was no response. But the figure was still there. I looked frantically outside, hoping to find a glimmer of hope. And then, I saw it. A green sign appeared on the side of the road. "Next town, 30 miles. 30 miles. Not far. If I could just drive another 30 miles, I would be somewhere with people, with lights." I told myself I just had to focus on that number. 30 miles. But then, I felt something touch my right shoulder. As light as a thin piece of cloth brushing against my skin. I panicked, jerking the wheel again. The car swerved, the wheels scraping the pavement, my heart pounding. This time, I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed down on the gas, the speedometer shot up. The wind howled outside. The figure was still there, in the rearview mirror. It didn't disappear. Then I saw the light. A small gas station appeared ahead, neon lights illuminating the night sky. A pickup truck was parked at one of the pumps. I drove down the ramp, slamming on the brakes in front of the convenience store. My whole body was shaking as I turned off the engine. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Maybe it was afraid of the light. Taking a deep breath, I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, giving me some relief. I looked through the car window, the passenger seat was still empty. No ghosts. I grabbed my wallet and walked into the store. The clerk, a young man, looked up at me and nodded. I nodded back, trying to act normal. But my hands were still shaking. I stuffed them into my pocket to hide them. "Can I use the restroom?" I asked. The clerk handed me a key attached to a plastic card. The bathroom was at the back of the building. I stepped through the store's light, into the darkness. The bathroom door was under a flickering light. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and locked the door behind me. The air smelled of disinfectant. The light was dim, but at least I could see myself in the mirror. I stared at my reflection. My eyes were wide, filled with fear. I turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on my face. Each drop woke me from my panic. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. Then I opened them. And I saw it. Behind me, in the mirror. A pale face. Lips moving. And empty eyes.